Junior had always been the center of attention in the Onu household. As the only child of Mr. and Mrs. Onu, he lived a life of privilege, surrounded by everything a child could dream of: expensive toys, the best clothes, and enrollment in the most prestigious primary school in the city. Every school term brought a new set of possessions for Junior to flaunt. Whether it was the latest gadget or the trendiest sneakers, his classmates couldn't help but admire him. "Junior, you are so lucky," Samuel, his closest friend, often said as they sat together in the cafeteria during lunch. "Yes, I am lucky," Junior replied with a broad smile. "That is because I am an only child. All the attention, all the gifts, they are just for me." Samuel chuckled before responding thoughtfully. "Well, I love having siblings. It's nice to have someone to play with and share things with." But Junior's smile dimmed slightly. "Not me," he said, shaking his head firmly. "I don't want my mom to give birth ever again. I like being the only one. I want everything to myself." Samuel gave him a curious look but said nothing more. Junior, seemingly satisfied with his declaration, turned his focus back to his lunch, already planning what new treasure he would show off next. At home, Junior's life was nothing short of a dream. He enjoyed every luxury, from his favorite meals served on demand to uninterrupted hours watching cartoons. As the only child, he basked in the undivided attention of his parents, cherishing every moment of his pampered existence. One evening, his parents returned home with radiant smiles, their excitement impossible to miss. "Junior, guess what?" his father began, his voice brimming with joy. "You are going to be a big brother soon." The word hit Junior like a thunderbolt. His heart sank, and his perfect world seemed to crumble before his eyes. He stared at his parents, his face pale and tense. "But Daddy, am I not a good child? Why would you want another baby?" His parents exchanged confused glances, unsure of how to respond. "Junior," his mother said softly, crouching to his level, "don't you ever feel lonely? Wouldn't it be wonderful to have someone to play with, a companion to share your life with?" Junior shook his head vehemently, tears welling up in his eyes. "No, when the baby comes, you wouldn't care about me anymore," he cried, his voice trembling with fear and sadness. His parents knelt beside him, trying to reassure him. "That's not true, Junior," his father said, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We will love you just as much as we have always have. You will always be a special boy, even with your sibling around." But Junior wasn't convinced. Deep inside, a seed of resentment had already begun to grow, threatening to overshadow the joy of his parents' announcement. When the baby arrived, Junior's worst fears became a reality. The house was a hive of activity as friends, neighbors, and relatives came in droves, each bearing gifts for his newborn sister. Junior stood in the corner, watching the colorful packages pile up. "So none of these gifts are for me, eh?" he muttered under his breath, his small fist clenched in frustration. He felt invisible as the attention he once enjoyed was now lavished entirely on his baby sister. Every cry from the infant drew his parents' attention. Junior felt as though he no longer existed in their eyes. The warmth and the attention and affection that used to revolve around him had shifted, leaving him feeling cold and unwanted. At school, Junior sat quietly in the cafeteria, poking at his food with a fork. His friend Samuel, noticing his sober demeanor, leaned closer. "What's wrong, Junior? You don't look happy. Is the baby okay?" Junior looked up, his face a mix of anger and sadness. "The baby is fine," he replied bitterly. "But I'm not. Everyone's so focused on her. I feel like I don't matter anymore." Samuel frowned. "But aren't you happy to finally have a companion, someone to grow up with, to play with?" Junior's expression darkened. "She's not a companion. She's competition." He spat. "I wish she was never born." Samuel's eyes widened in shock at his friend's words, but said nothing more, leaving Junior to stew in his resentment. At home, Junior's life continued to spiral into what felt like a nightmare. His parents, blinded by their excitement for the baby, seemed to overlook him entirely. When they bought toys, only one would be handed to him, while the rest were reserved for his little sister. One afternoon, Junior was in the living room, trying to find solace in watching his favorite cartoon. It was the one thing that made him happy and feel like life hadn't changed entirely. But just as he was settling in, his mother entered, carrying the baby. "Junior," she said with a bright smile, "can you switch to the Cocomelon channel? Your sister loves it." Junior turned to her, his face filled with disbelief. "But mommy, I'm watching my favorite cartoon," he protested. Without a word, his mother walked over, picked up the remote and changed the channel. Junior stared in shock as the familiar characters disappeared from the screen, replaced by colorful animation meant for his sister. Anger boiled inside him. He jumped up from the couch and stormed off to his room, slamming the door shut behind him. Throwing himself onto his bed, he stared at the ceiling, his heart pounding with frustration. "I wish he could just die," he whispered angrily. The words lingered in the air, heavy with resentment. For Junior, every passing moment felt like a cruel reminder that his life had changed forever, and not for the better. The weeks that followed were filled with bitterness, each day a painful struggle as he tried to come to terms with sharing his world with a sister he wished didn't exist. One day, Mr. and Mrs. Onu were preparing to leave for a short meeting. The meeting was only scheduled to last an hour, so they decided to leave Junior in charge of the house. "Make sure you take care of your sister. As her big brother, that's your duty," his father instructed, placing a hand on Junior's shoulder. Junior nodded silently, though his heart was far from agreeing. As soon as they left, Junior settled in the living room, turning into his favorite cartoon. The house seemed peaceful for a while, but soon his little sister's cry broke through the silence. She was hungry and needed attention. Junior glanced toward the sound but refused to move. He continued watching his cartoon, determined not to let her cries disturb him. As the wailing grew louder and more insistent, his resolve began to crack. Frustrated, Junior eventually stood up and went to her crib. He picked her up, but instead of comforting her, his frustration boiled over. Looking around, he spotted the freezer. "You stay here until they return," Junior muttered, placing her gently inside and shutting the lid. The cry stopped for a moment, muffled by the cold confines of the freezer. Junior sighed, feeling a wave of peace as he returned to his cartoon. 7 minutes later, silence consumed the house entirely. When Mr. and Mrs. Onu returned from their meeting, the house seemed eerily quiet. "Junior, where is your sister?" his mother asked as she placed her bag down. Without looking up from his cartoon, Junior nonchalantly pointed toward the freezer. His parents exchanged a confused glance. "Junior, stop playing pranks. Where is she?" his father asked, his voice tinged with unease. "She was crying too much, so I put her in the freezer to keep her quiet," Junior replied, his tone casual. His parents froze in shock before rushing to the freezer. With trembling hands, Mr. Onu opened the lid. Inside, their worst nightmare lay before them. Their baby daughter, lifeless and frozen. Panicked, Mr. Onu quickly called for an ambulance. They raced to the hospital, clinging to a thread of hope. But when they arrived, the doctors delivered the devastating news. The baby was gone. Grief consumed the Onus. Their hearts shattered as they tried to process the tragedy. When Junior was asked why he had done such a thing, his answer was chilling. "She was taking you away from me," he said, his voice void of remorse but filled with frustration. The authorities were called and Junior was sent to juvenile detention for his crime. A therapist was assigned to help him understand the gravity of his actions. For Mr. and Mrs. Ono, the damage was irreversible. Their house, once filled with joy, was now overshadowed by tragedy. Despite their pain, they hoped Junior would one day realize the weight of his actions and learn from them.